The night before the Richmond bread riot, which happened on April 2nd, 1863, a woman named Mary Jackson met with a group of women at the Belvedere Hill Baptist Church and planned out what the game plan for the morning was. And they decided that they would meet at 8 a.m. underneath the Washington Monument, which in Richmond is that big George Washington on a horse statue. And they would get hatchets and axes, and they were going to go find some food in the morning. There were bread riots across the South during this period. Bread riots this was not the only one. This was by far the biggest. And the thing about the bread riots is that the factors across the board, right, are the war is decimating food networks. Food scarcity is a major issue. The Union and Confederate soldiers are going through, and when they find fields and livestock, they are burning fields and destroying livestock. And there's no salt, and salt is necessary to preserve meat at this point. So there's no way to preserve and traffic meat into cities. And also the cities have become inundated with people from the rural areas, right, that are refugees from smaller towns that have had problems, that have had battles or whatever. And so, like, Richmond is 2 to 3 times as big as it was just a few years before and doesn't have the supply line set up to begin with. But when Mary Jackson and her women, armed with hatchets and axes, decided to go get some food, 3 other things had happened in the month prior. One was that there was this major kind of explosion at what we might call like a munitions factory today, but realistically this is a 100 by 50 foot wood building that is full of mostly adolescent, poor girls that are doing the work of assembling and disassembling explosives. Most of the kids that were killed in this were 13, 14, 15, 16. The woman that started the explosion was tamping on trying to get something out of a box and hit it too hard, and the whole place went up. She was 19 years old, right? So the poorest part of Richmond had just lost 50 people in this grisly explosion that was tied to the war right before that. They also had just had the water pump that pumped water to the public hydrants go down. And so instead of having at least water that was coming out at public hydrants that you could just come get your water for your household needs, you had to use the public well, which put a lot of pressure on this household process. And then the third thing is that there was a giant snowstorm. And this snowstorm hit the roads of Richmond that already had been destroyed by all of this military traffic and everything else, right? Nobody had any effort to put towards infrastructure needs. Everybody was putting everything towards the war. And what that meant was that when this foot of snow hit, that all the roads got super muddy and that food stopped coming in. Farmers stopped bringing in fresh meat. People stopped bringing in the goods that they were going to sell at the markets. Food stopped. And in various war journals of various clerks of the time and stuff like that, they say that there's signs of famine hitting Richmond, Virginia at this particular moment, right? So these women meet. There's about 300 of them in the beginning. The crowd swells to over 1,000. Depending on what source you look at, that might be 5,000, it might be 1,001, right? But it's definitely, we're over 1,000 people marching through Richmond. And the first place they go is not, bread is a misnomer, right? They go for bacon, and they hit this huge warehouse full of bacon. They take hundreds of pounds of bacon. They take ham. They take other meats. They take dry goods. They take everything that they want from all of these shops and warehouses along that district. They do take things that are not food, and they take shoes. By the end of the March riot, a bunch of the people are wearing new shoes, which is noted by like observers. But what you got to understand is that the shoes that they were wearing were so terrible that grabbing new shoes meant putting them on, right? They're not taking 2 or 3 new pairs of shoes home They're literally, a lot of them are shoeless or have tattered shoes, and they are taking shoes. Not to excuse exactly, but to say, like, that's where we're at here. And then they take fabric. This is women-led. There are men in it, but it's women-led and women-centered. And they take a lot of sheeting fabric. So at the time, everybody made their own household linens. They took hundreds of yards of sheeting fabric that they needed to do household tasks with. And they took hundreds of yards of calico that you would be using to make a new dress with. And disbanded very quickly once eventually caught. Right? The mayor shows up and reads the Riot Act, which means reading out loud the Riot Act, saying that this is a riot and needs to stop now, or the military will get involved. And they stop. They disband. About 50 of them are arrested at the time. Mary Jackson is arrested, but eventually only charged with a misdemeanor because they could only prove that she instigated and organized the whole thing, but she herself could not be proven to have taken anything, which is interesting. So she didn't take anything, or at least wasn't proven in a court to have taken anything. She ends up with a misdemeanor. She does go back to her house, but she dies right after the war is over, they think. They don't actually have a clear death record on her. And by 1870, when the next census happens, her husband, the painter, is living with another woman. Widowers didn't stay widowers long back then. And so he's living with another woman, and she is part of history.